Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Today I'm going to show you how to set up the auto leveling on your Indoor 3 or Indoor 3 Pro using a BLTouch kit. So this is the BLTouch V3. The process should be the same with the V2 as well. I know it does change when you're going back to some of the older ones. I would recommend that if you are using an older kit that you buy the pinout board, which we'll talk about later. It just allows you to do the connection without actually having to cut any wires, which we don't want to do. Before we can actually start on this video, I need you guys to go through the firmware upgrade video if you haven't already. I'll link to it in the description below. It basically goes through setting up the bootloader on your Indoor 3 so that you can actually use the firmware we're going to be talking about here, which is going to be the TH3D firmware. I did not want to use the Cura firmware. There's too many limitations, which I don't want to go into here. But if you switch back from the TH3D to the Cura, you will lose the thermal protection, or thermal runaway protection, sorry. So I'll show you how to set it up with the TH3D firmware. And it's actually easier in most cases, so we got that going for us there too. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and unbox this guy, and then we're going to start setting up the actual hardware, running the cables. Then we'll go set up the firmware, because we will have to push the firmware again with a couple of modifications to account for the BLTouch. And then from there, I'll show you what changes you need to make on Cura so that it runs that every time. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we do, make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Alright guys, first I wanted to show you what was in the box. You have some mounting hardware that it comes with, an extra Pro piece here, the actual BLTouch unit itself, the mounting bracket, the cables that we're going to need. I know some of the older versions come with some very short cables. So if you are using an older version and it has like the 6-inch cable or whatever it is, you might need to get extenders. I'll see if I can find any good ones online and I'll link them below. Some zip ties. And here's the pin board that I was talking about. So the ribbon cable that would be plugged into the actual board itself would plug in here, and then this cable will plug in here, and it allows you to do all of that without actually having to slice the cable, which I'm not a huge fan of. So if you got a kit that did not come with this, if you don't have it installed, you can just send a kit back and get one that does have it, or you can buy this board individually, your choice there. And then these two are related to setting up the bootloader and the firmware that comes with this setup. We will not be using these because, like I mentioned, we'll be going based on the firmware that we set up on a previous video, which will be linked to below. It's just a much cleaner setup, I think. So we'll just set this off to the side for now, then we'll go ahead and start setting everything up. Alright guys, first thing we're going to want to do here is take off these two screws to remove this housing. This is where the actual BLTouch unit is going to be plugged in. So just set these screws off to the side here so we don't lose them. Alright, now just doing a test alignment here, make sure that this does go in like it should, which it does. I know that on some of the older kits that this piece does not drop it low enough, and some people had to put just additional washers, or I think some people might have used just additional spacers or longer screws just to make the BLTouch unit lower. Basically what was happening is the unit was too high and it would never actually engage. So this would never actually touch the board, therefore it would never succeed. Alright, so let's go ahead and mount the BLTouch on here, and then we'll mount this up there, then we'll get a couple measurements and make sure that we're good. Alright, sorry about that guys, I was just getting everything set up here to mount this. So we're going to want to use the M3 6 screws here that comes with this kit. So we'll just set this off to the side, and we want to make sure that the board is on the inside, so it'll go just like this, and then we would just put these screws in. Go ahead and get this one started and move over to the next one. Alright, now you're going to want to tighten, make sure that this is tight, but don't over tighten it because this is plastic at the bottom, so you don't want to snap that plastic. So just get it nice and firm or snug. There we go. Now we're going to want to undo our cabling here. Alright, so now that we got this open, we'll go ahead and connect it. With this, there's only one way it can actually go in. There's rivets in the back, and same here, that kind of force the alignment. I believe on some of the older ones you could actually insert it incorrectly. I think that the actual pinout is the same, so you can just look at these cables and see the white is on the left and blue is on the right, but you want to verify that on the specific one that you're using. Alright, so that'll just pop in here, kind of. Alright, now that we got that done, let's go ahead and mount it. The other screws that this came with here are a little bit longer than the original ones that we took out. So I'm going to just put the old ones back in this bag just so we have them if I ever need to remove it. But these are longer to account for the difference in this metal here. So we'll go ahead and just plug this in here and then align all three of these holes on the three different pieces, so you cover the BLTouch mounting point and then the back here. So it can be a little bit tricky. Just get it started. We want to make sure we get the other one in first before we tighten them down. Alright, and then let's do this one. You can't actually just start the screw off with your hand. You won't be able to actually get in there. So I'm just putting it on here and then just kind of aligning it. Alright. And I think doing the top screw first and then this one is easier because the alignment was much cleaner already. Alright, so we got that one tight and we got this one tight. I went ahead and zoomed in on this just so we have a good picture here, but got a little bit of filament coming out here. You want to make sure that the actual pin on the BLTouch unit is lower than the tip of the extruder. If it's not going to be engaged, which is the point that I was mentioning before with some of the original units. The bracket had it up higher and this was just slightly above the tip, so it's never actually going to engage. Alright, the next thing we need here is two measurements because we're going to have to enter this into the firmware later. It's going to be how far from the extruder tip is this pin out, so we need to know left to right and then top to bottom if you're looking at it from that axis. So not the z-axis, just x and y axis. So let's go ahead and get that. If you have any calibers, now's a good time to use them. If not, you're going to have to use a just a really good tape measure or something like that, or a ruler. But if you don't have calibers, I'll link to a decent pair in the description below. They're not that expensive. I think you can't really see here. They're not that expensive. I think this pair was maybe 15 or 20 bucks. I don't remember. I bought it a long time ago. But I'll go and link to one in the description below. So go ahead and turn these on and go from here. Alright, so that is 43 millimeters. So let's go ahead and write that down. I just had to grab my whiteboard here. You can use pen and paper or whatever, it doesn't matter. Just want to make sure that you have it. Alright, so there's that one. This next one's going to be a little bit more challenging. It doesn't have to be exact here, but we want to make sure that we get the distance from here to there, just looking at it from this angle. So like I said, my tools here can't get that, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it here just to get best estimate. And we're at about 7. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that number down. I mean, you want to get these numbers as close as possible, but if it's off a little bit, it's okay. Alright, so let me go and turn this off and put it away. Alright, now we're going to want to run this cable along the cable that's going to the extruder. So we'll just bring this up. We'll use some of our zip ties here, which I'm going to have to grab some scissors in a minute just to go ahead and cut them off. But we're going to want to make sure that this is on the inside here. And then go ahead and zip tie this. Alright, before I continue this, one thing I forgot to do, which shouldn't matter, is I just want to be safe, is make sure that this can go all the way over without the BLTouch unit touching the actual casing over here, which we're good. So I'll put this back in place, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing with the cabling. Alright, so probably about every 4 inches or so here, we're going to want to put a zip tie just to make sure that it stays clean and the wires don't get caught in anything. Alright, so this is good here. When you're going over the tubing as well, make sure you don't tighten it down too much because you don't want to crush the tubing. And then I'm just trying to get the cleanest path possible here. So I only had to put it on the tubing once. Oh, damn it. And then down here, just pull the cable as much as you can without stretching it, just to make sure that you don't have any extra slack in there. And then we'll go and put this last one in here. And let me grab my scissors really quick. Alright, I'm back with my scissors. I'm just going to cut these flush just so we don't have the zip ties hanging around. Make sure that when you are cutting these, to make sure you're only cutting the zip tie, not the cables. That'll make for a bad day. Alright, so now that we got those cut, we're going to want to take apart the casing around the board itself. If you have the Ender 3, it's going to be 3 screws up top, and then this will slide out, and then you got your fan here. If you have the 3 Pro like this, we're going to have to turn it over and then take the screws out from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I covered this in a little bit more detail in the firmware upgrade video that I did, but we're going to want to just take off these 3 screws here. And again, just set them to the side so that you don't lose them. Alright guys, I went ahead and zoomed in on the board so we have a better view. We're going to want to take this cable out here. This is the one that if you didn't have this other pinout board that you would have to cut into. And again, I do not recommend that. So just be careful trying to take this out. You don't want to snap or break anything. And then this will plug into here. As so. And let's go ahead and grab these cables. So actually I'm going to move down a couple of these zip ties that I had just to have it a little bit cleaner coming into this area. It's a good thing about zip ties, you can kind of move them around. Alright, so we're going to want to run this cable in here. And keep in mind that this will go on incorrectly. So you want to make sure that they are on the right pins. So you want the yellow one on this side. So just like this. So the yellow one on the opposite side of the power supply. So I'm just going to plug this guy in. Actually, it might be easier to pop this out to plug in and plug it back in. There we go. Now I'm going to plug this back in here. And then plug it back into the board. Also, I should have already brought this up, but make sure that when you're working in here that you do not have the power to the unit on. Alright, the next thing we want to do here is unplug the Z-axis stop switch and then plug this red one in so that it's using the BLTouch there. So it's going to be the third one down. 1, 2, 3. It's kind of tough to get into here. Alright guys, another tip that I realized going through this would have been nice to know ahead of time is these are glued in place from the back. So if you can get behind there and get that glue out, you'll be much better off because that was a pain to get out. So now I'm going to plug this in where the Z one was plugged in and go ahead and plug this back in. And that's all there is to it here. Now I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this and then we'll go to the computer. Alright guys, we're now at the computer with the Ender 3 plugged into it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the TH3D firmware that we downloaded in the last video. I will link to that in the description below. And then open firmware windows. This will open everything we need, including the Arduino IDE, and that will get us started. Alright, now first we want to go up to Tools and down to the port and make sure that you do have the Ender plugged in here. COM1 is something else that I have plugged in, and then the Ender is plugged into COM8 right now. So just make sure that that's all set up. Then we can go ahead and go over to configuration backend.h and then make a couple changes there. Let me go ahead and minimize this output window so we have a little bit more space to work with. The first thing we want to do in here is search for Ender 3 just to make sure that we're setting the config changes for that printer. Just go and do an find. Alright, so this is going to be the config changes for Ender 3. We just want to make sure that our in-stop inverting is set to false on all of these. Some of the previous versions had it set to true, so depending on the version that you're looking at, you might see a little bit different settings. Just make sure that these are set to false. Alright, let's jump over to the configuration H tab. Alright, keep in mind that all the changes that we made in the last video are still present here. So if we search for Ender 3, it should be uncommented. So, yeah, see. And then all of this is covered in the previous video, so make sure you go through that first. There's just a couple changes, just this one and then the description, but this would be the main one you'd want to change. So if you haven't gone through that video and you're just using this version of the firmware, you can just uncheck this or uncomment this and be good to go. Alright, with that done, now we want to search for Easy Probe Mount, and then we should have our settings under there. I'll leave this up for a second so you can just type it. And then they're making a note here that Ender 3 uses the same as the CR10, but let's close this out really quick. We want to uncomment custom probe, so go ahead and delete these two forward slashes, and then we want to add a new line right below that telling it what pin to use. I don't want to go into too much detail on going over all of that, but this is plugged into pin 27, so we'll go ahead and just add that. So define CRV. All right, so now that we are telling it to use pin 27, we can go ahead and move on. All right, so let's go ahead and search for easy able points. Oops. All right, so the default setting is 3. You can take it up to 9 if you want. The more points you add to it, theoretically, the more level it will get at the cost of time. So 3 points would pretty much be the minimum. It'll be a 3x3 grid. You can go all the way up to 9. It's now recommending that you stick with odd numbers. So I believe on an older version, it actually set it to 4 by default. So they changed this to 3, which was nice. All right, we want to make sure that fast probe is enabled. Again, you are sacrificing theoretically a little bit of accuracy on the level for speed, but it's going to be level enough and it'll work just fine. All right, then the next one I wanted to go over, which this is optional for you, it's having the extruder heat while it's probing. It will save you time because obviously it's starting to heat everything up during the probing process and you're not waiting for it to finish before it starts heating. So I would like that uncommented as well. That's not a requirement. These are more of a preference thing, so you can adjust them or play around with them based on what you think is best. But this is just what I like. The rest of the settings I'm going to leave default. They've made a lot of modifications over the last year or so on some of these settings so that it works better with the BLTouch unit, so we'll just leave that alone. Alright, now the next part is going to be the probe offset, which is why we got those measurements earlier. So let's go ahead and search for that. Alright, so now this is a section we need. Alright, here we're going to want to uncomment define BLTouch. It's saying that it is the BLTouch unit. And interestingly enough, they added that pin 27 into the config as a default for now. We've already entered it above, so I'm going to leave this commented out because we already have it up there. It doesn't matter the position in the file, so that's fine. But if you wanted to leave it default, you can just remove these 2 forward slashes and delete the line that we created earlier. The last time I went through this process was with an older BLTouch unit and on an Indoor 3. It was probably about a year ago, and a lot of my notes are a little bit dated from that. A lot of the process is still the same, so this should work. We'll find out at the end, I guess. All right, but now we actually have to enter the offset. So we got to go to our printer section and then uncomment custom probe. So I'm just going to grab this and copy it, and then yep. All right, so I ended up going through there a couple times just to find it. As soon as we get to this one, hit next, it just skips this whole thing, so I was scrolling down. If you just wanted to search for enabled custom probe, this should get to this section directly. Let me just verify that for you guys really quick. Alright, so let's just go up to the top. Control F, there we go. Yeah, and that'll bring us right to the area that we need. So you can do that versus just custom probe if you want. Alright, so here's where we actually define the parameters. This would be the extruder. If we're going left to it, which is where the ender is, it's going to be down in this grid. I'm sorry, not the ender, the BLTouch. So we're going to have negative values for both of them. If we remember from the measurements we took, for the x-axis it was negative 43. So negative 43, and then here we had negative 7. For some reason they defaulted to 1010. I guess there are different probes that mount differently, which 1010 would be somewhere like right here, but we're over here. So just put the values in that you have and then we'll be good to go there. Alright, let's go back over to the configuration backup.h. There was one thing I forgot to change. We want to search for fixed mounted probe. I think there's going to be 4 values with it. It looks like there's 3. And then we're going to want to replace that with BLTouch. So I'll just put BLTouch here. So we're doing a find and replace. I like to do one at a time, just to make sure I know what I'm replacing. If you're comfortable, you can just do replace all, but I'm just doing them one at a time. So just change that one, then find, replace, and then again replace. Now we shouldn't find any more of the fixed mounted probes. Alright, so at this point we can actually attempt to push the firmware to the printer. So if we go up to upload or verify, right now it's just verifying everything that we entered, then we can go ahead and do the upload. I know on the previous version that I did this on, which was just an Ender 3, it failed due to memory issues. So I know some people uncommented the SD card reader, which I don't think makes sense. I'll show you what to uncomment. You can just uncomment the image that starts up when you power on the printer. I mean, I don't really care about that image. If I had to give anything up, it would be that. Alright, so now we can just go ahead and upload, but no, it's not quite done yet. It's still spinning. I'm getting impatient. I saw the green light over here. Alright, so I thought this would be the case. The newer versions of the printer added a little bit more memory. So in this case, I got 94% of the memory used, so we're good. So if I upload this, it should be fine. We'll go ahead and just verify really quick. And then I'll show you what to uncomment if you get an error there. I'm sorry, comment out if you get an error. Alright, so we're writing it. Alright, so it looks like it was successful, so we're good to go there. If you are using an Ender 3 or a version that has less memory, if you just go back to configuration H and search for disable boot, you can comment this out. So uncomment this, removing these 2 forward slashes, and then that will free up enough space to allow it to actually send it to the printer. Alright, so now with that, we have everything on the printer. Let's go ahead and open up Cura. Alright, so while Cura is loading, if you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. It'll help support videos like this where I'm having to buy the hardware and stuff specifically for this video. I'd really appreciate it. Alright, so now what we have to do is tell Cura to actually run the auto level process before it starts printing, unless we're not going to get any benefit from it. So if we go to the machine settings, which would be under settings, printer, manage printers, and then we can go into machine settings for the printer that we're working with. We just have to add one line in here on the start. I'm sorry, I had the end highlighted. You don't want to add anything to the end. We have to add it to the start. Alright, so after the G28 home axis, we want to add G29. And then just make a note here, BLTouch mesh generation. And then go ahead and close that. So now anytime that we use this version of Cura to slice anything, it's going to be adding that into the process. Actually, for consistency, I'm going to put a space here. That space isn't needed. I just like that. I just like them all to be the same. All right, so let's go ahead and close that. If you do switch machines or uninstall Cura, you will have to add that back in there. So just make sure that to keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and close this. And let's go ahead and plug the printer in and take a look at the firmware. Alright guys, I got the printer plugged in. Let's go ahead and power it on and see what it does. Alright, now that it's on, let's go and take a look at the firmware. If we go under control, we should see BLTouch in there, which we do. We just got the offsets. Alright, so that looks right. So let's just do a self-test. Okay. So we're going to reset it. And go to deploy. Just making sure that it's going through the process right. So the self-test is working correctly. The probe is going up and down as we expect. If we go back into control here, go to BLTouch and deploy, it will lower the probe. Alright guys, the last thing we need to do here is make an adjustment to the Z offset per the instructions. So let me show you how to do that. You want to go to control, motion, and the offset here. Now we got to go to negative 2.10. Okay, now we want to go and save that so that it reserves those settings when you power it off. So we have to go up one and then store settings. Now let's power off and make sure it's kept those settings. So again, if we go to motion, Z offset, we're at negative 2.1. Restarting the system here. Alright, now if we go back to the same place, we should have the same setting, negative 2.1. Now we can go ahead and run our test. Alright, so let's go ahead and print something to make sure that it's working correctly. So let's go to print from SD. I just sliced this with the configurations in Cura that we just added. So it should heat up the bed and then go through the process. So hopefully we'll be good here. Let's give it a minute. I'll stop the video till we get heated up and it starts the process again. Alright, so guys, we are up to temperature. Took a little bit longer than I expected because I set it higher than I should have from another test I was doing. But let's go ahead and make sure it goes through the process here of leveling. And let's see what it does. So it engaged the probe, you can see there. Alright, so that was successful. Alright guys, that's the process to set up your BLTouch auto level system. If you run into any issues or have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you haven't already, I'll go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It'll help us out.